In this New World Aeternum bow build guide, we'll be taking a look at the bow weapon. It's a ranged weapon that uses arrows to attack enemies from mid-range, and the bow scales solely with the Dexterity stat, so if you want to increase its damage, you'll need to invest heavily in that attribute. Like the musket, bows used to require ammunition, specifically arrows, to function. However, ammo was removed for all ranged weapons in New World Aeternum, and instead they now have a plus 20% base damage boost to compensate, making it easier to start with the bow from the beginning of the game, as you don't need to farm materials in order to craft arrows. One unique aspect of the bow is its ability to shoot with either a full or partial draw. When aiming, you can release a regular shot or hold down the right trigger button until the bow glows to charge a more powerful version. However, if you're firing without aiming, hip firing, there's no option to charge, and those shots will always deal less damage than partial or fully drawn bow shots, but the advantage is you can hip fire while locked on, making it easier to hit targets with them repeatedly. To perform a charge shot with the bow, you need to aim by holding L2 and hold down R2 until the bow is fully drawn. Unlike the musket, the bow has an arc to its shots, so when firing over long distances, you'll need to account for this by adjusting your aim. This makes the bow a bit harder to use at very long ranges when compared to the musket. If you prefer long-range combat in general, though, I'd recommend switching to the musket. But if you like mid to close range combat, the bow is a better choice. It's also more effective in melee situations thanks to abilities designed for close combat. The pros of the bow are that it attacks easier with the lock-on feature, doesn't need arrows anymore, has great mobility with skills like evade shot, and can do both single target and AoE damage. Lock-on doesn't help with precise aiming though, has limited crowd control, and it has very limited utility. Next, let's take a look at the bow skill trees, Skirmisher and Hunter. The Skirmisher tree focuses on AoE damage and debuffs. It's great for situations where you're up close, dealing with groups of enemies, especially since many will rush you once aggroed. On the other hand, the Hunter tree is more of a longer range single target damage tree. It has some high damage abilities, but they typically target only one enemy with the exception of Explosive Shot. If you're looking to quickly take down a tough enemy or single out a player, the Hunter tree is ideal. Starting with the Skirmish tree, the first ability is Poison Shot. This creates a poison cloud that deals damage over time in an AoE. It doesn't have to hit an enemy directly, as wherever the arrow lands, the poison cloud will appear. This is particularly useful for softening up groups of enemies in PvE or mid-sized PvP skirmishes. Progressing this skill line increases the damage of this skill. Evade Shot is another Skirmisher ability that lets you jump backward while shooting at an enemy in front of you. It's perfect for creating space between you and a pursuing enemy, allowing you to maintain distance and continue attacking without getting caught in melee range. Progressing this skill line will also grant the skill with a knockback effect, as well as give you a haste buff, which is very useful when kiting against enemies in PvP. Rain of Arrows is an AoE attack that lets you target an area dealing damage to enemies within it. When upgraded, it also applies a bleed effect. This ability shines in PvE, especially when fighting multiple enemies in dungeons or during questing. Progressing this skill line allows Rain of Arrows to cause bleed, as well as inflicting them with slow. The capstone of the Skirmisher tree, Evasive Tactics, gives you the Empower effect and increases your damage dealt by 15% for 5 seconds after dodging. This is very useful, especially during PvP situations where enemies will often attempt to close in on you, and this will also be useful during solo expeditions as enemies will try to swarm you and you'll be dodging a lot. Overall, a more useful capstone compared to its Hunter counterpart, I find. Moving on to the Hunter tree, the first ability is Rapid Shot. This fires 3 arrows in quick succession, with the first 2 doing 100% weapon damage and the third doing 125%. It's excellent for high burst damage in PvP or against tough enemies. Progressing this skill allows you to get a 50% cooldown reduction if you hit the same enemy with all 3 arrows. This skill is even more deadly thanks to New World Aeternum's lock-on, which makes it easier to land all 3 arrows on the same target. Penetrating Shot is another strong ability in the Hunter tree. It deals high damage and pierces through targets and travels more than 100 meters. While the piercing effect isn't always useful unless enemies are lined up perfectly, the ability's raw damage makes it great for single target bursts. Progressing this skill line increases the damage of Penetrating Shot. Explosive Arrow is a good AoE skill. It deals half of your weapon damage on impact and then detonates, dealing huge damage while covering a radius of 2.5 meters. It's perfect for crowd control, and it also is useful in PvP where there are enemies huddled together for dealing with huge group damage. Progressing the skill line allows you to inflict burn on your enemies, as well as increasing its damage at the cost of reduction on the explosion's radius. The capstone of the Hunter tree is Concussion. It increases your damage when landing headshots by 20%. Headshots are not impossible for bow users, but with the addition of the lock-on feature, you'll be less likely to use manual aiming when you can just fire rapid arrows from the hip. It can be useful in PvP if you've gotten used to dishing out headshots, but if you haven't, I recommend the Evasive Tactics capstone. Which 3 skills you use in combination will largely be determined by the type of content you are trying to accomplish. For instance, if you're solo questing, you'll probably want at least Poison Shot, Rain of Arrows, or Explosive Shot for some AoE, potentially Rapid Shot to take down hard-to-kill targets, and maybe even Evade Shot to create separation if enemies get the drop on you. However, if you're doing mid to large group PvP, for example, you'll be on the back line and hopefully won't being attacked by enemies, so you'll probably want to focus on ways to deal lots of damage to multiple targets. In this case, you might want Poison Shot, Rain of Arrows, and Explosive Shot, or maybe even Penetrating Shot since it can go through multiple targets. And you're not going to worry about Rapid Shot because you're not trying to take down one target, and you're not going to worry about Evade Shot because you're not trying to evade as you're hopefully on the back line not being attacked. When choosing a weapon to pair with the bow, it works really well at mid to short range, so you don't necessarily need a melee weapon like you would if you're using a musket. The musket can be less effective in close combat, but the bow has tools to help you create distance from enemies and doesn't need to be reloaded. This allows you to keep firing constantly as long as you can maintain separation. If you want to go for a pure ranged build, the bow can handle it on its own. However, because weapon cooldowns are shared, you can't use two bows, so you'll want to equip a second weapon. A musket can be a great option for longer range encounters with the bow for when enemies get closer. Alternatively, a melee weapon like the spear or rapier is a good choice for when enemies close the gap. Both weapons scale with dexterity, so they pair well with the bow, making either an excellent backup. Since the bow has no intelligence scaling, unlike the musket, there's no point in pairing it with weapons like the fire staff or ice gauntlet. While the musket can benefit from a hybrid build with intelligence and dexterity, the bow is most effective when you're fully invested into dexterity, so sticking to dex-based weapons is the best approach. Finally, when using a ranged weapon like the bow, light armor is your best bet. Light armor grants a 15% damage bonus, which is crucial when focusing on hitting enemies from a distance. It also lets you dodge roll, which is definitely useful if you're going for the evasive tactics capstone. Since you're aiming to avoid getting hit, maximizing your damage output with light armor is the way to go, making every shot count and hopefully taking down enemies before they even get to you. Stay tuned for more New World build guides. If you have any questions about the bow, feel free to check out our New World wiki for more details. What do you guys think of the bow? Have you tried it? What kind of weapon do you prefer, bow or musket? It seems to be the most popular weapon used during the beta, but let us know what you think in the comments below.